this is something that I have cared about and talked about for a long time. This was one of our topics on our platform page. And I really view this as this imperative that has to be addressed before we can advance as a civilization. And I do not know how much more I can implore people to understand this. And what I want to know is, I guess, really, what can we do? I mean, I talk about this ad infinitum and have guests on like you and ad infinitum, but I recently had this thought that this is like a two-part process, reparations, because to me, we always talk about like cutting the check, and I'm all for that. I think that everybody should get together and sue for what is owed, and that's our problem. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think we should determine it. I think it's like a lawsuit where you say what your damages are and we say, okay, and we pay them. But the first part is, we need to stop doing the same shit that we've been doing that's caused the need for the reparations. And I feel like, how can we be talking about repairing something that we're not even stopping the bleeding? And that's just something I had this sort of epiphany lately. So I was wondering your thoughts.
We got to do both, right? We got to kind of do both at the same time. So, because like you're right, we still haven't stopped. We still have the prison industrial complex. We still see all these different instances of like Black people died at a higher rate of COVID. I literally was reading an article today about a woman who they used the wrong number. So they literally cleared out her apartment as if she was like a tenant that they were evicting, but it was supposed to be like the neighbor. And she was like, so they threw out all her stuff and she's like, I'm not going back. So I don't even know if it was just maybe a ploy because they wanted her out. But when I tell you on a daily basis, Black Americans are still dealing with the impacts, it's a lot. But we need people to do both, to be perfectly honest. But I think a lot of it is, I meet a lot of good white people, and the issue is they don't really understand that Black Americans and white Americans live in two different live in two different Americas. Like, even like I'll listen to MLK's speech, the To America speech, and it rings true to me like he was speaking to me right now, and I saw it yesterday live. So first is everybody needs to understand that these things are happening, and we need people to care about Black Americans outside of when you see our dead bodies on TV. That's one of the main things. So when you start talking about reparations, a lot of people are like, oh, well, slavery was a long time ago. And it's like, well, it's not just for slavery, but let's just say per se it was for slavery. They're like, well, nobody who was alive then is still alive now. But the U.S. government was created, and that structure is still alive. That structure had slaves. That structure allowed slavery to take place. So even if we're not talking about individuals, we are talking about a government that allowed this to take place. And then Thomas Kramer talks about the actual injustices. The people who did the hard work, their labor was given to other people, and it's been passed down through generations. People who descend from slave owners know that they descend from slave owners. Like, they have conversations, there's groups. This is a thing. And so when you talk about like, so that money has been passed down the same way how some of these insurance companies still exist. All of the money is still in the system. So it was never paid to us. That's the injustice. That money should have been able to be passed down for generations to other groups, to our grandchildren, to our descendants. So when you start talking about, so it's not just slavery. After slavery, we went into something called the Black Codes. During the Black Codes, there was something called the Nader period. During the Nader period, from slavery, we had Reconstruction, which was like 7 years where they were actually trying to make amends. That's when the Freedmen's Bureau was created. That's when they started doing different programs. That's when they started talking about the 40 acres and the mule. But then when Lincoln died, they took that back. And then you go from that. So then we move into the Nader period, which is right after the Reconstruction, and then you move into the Black Codes, which all happens at the same time. So during this time, that's when you have your Tulsas, your Black Wall Streets. That's where you have your Rosewood massacres, Wilmington. Like, there's so many. I read a book called Buried in Bitter Waters, and it was literally just talking about racial cleansings, and there had to be like they had to expel at least 1,000 people or more for him to even include them in the book. So when you think of this, you have to understand, like, these homes were looted, they were burned, the property and land was taken, and a lot of families still live on that land to this day. So that's just taking you through that. And then you got to understand too, we had lynchings, and I've seen documentaries that have talked about people being held on plantations into the 90s. So there's a lot of stuff that people don't understand when you say it's just, so it's like, okay, we go through this, we go through the 50s, the 60s, we're still being lynched. And then we get through 65, we finally get the Voting Rights Act, we get some civil rights stuff going. And then by 1980, we move into deindustrialization and they start moving the jobs out of the cities. And then after the cities, they move to the suburbs. And then from the suburbs, they move them overseas. We were the first people impacted by that. And then I don't understand if people understand, but the crack era, that was brought on by the US government. They allowed the Nicaraguans to push the drugs here so they could fund the Iran-Contra wars.
I just want to say for a second, for anybody who hasn't seen the Netflix, the movie Crack,
yes.
I highly recommend
in the system too.
Yeah, it's these are really great movies for anybody who doesn't understand that the crack epidemic it was created by our government to incarcerate Black communities and basically create invalid communities that were incapable of thriving because drugs was their only source of revenue. So and it was by design.
You can watch old interviews with Gary Webb on Democracy Now! There's a movie called Kill the Messenger, and he also wrote a whole book called Dark Alliance that really lays out the whole thing. And actually, we did an episode on that too. Sorry, we do a lot of episodes.
I kind of get distracted in the visual sometimes there, and especially this picture of Ethan Hawke. Like,
oh yeah.
But I love your video. I love it.
I started watching that show. I'm having thoughts and troubles trying to get through it. I was like, I need a better John Brown show. But okay, I'm gonna get through it. I'm only on episode 3, so I have to get through the rest of it on Showtime. But
I'll have to watch.
But
I think that though, Sam, I just want to say, I think the bigger argument, and I always say this for people, is it doesn't really matter how long ago this was, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's still happening, it's current. But the thing is that there's nobody in this country that isn't a beneficiary of that system. And so we've all reaped the benefits, whether intentional or not. And I've said it a million times, my people didn't own anybody. My people were fleeing for their own lives from Russia and their businesses being set on fire. So my people were Jews escaping pogroms and, they were not hurtful, but yet I am still a person of benefits from slavery in this country. So they're just, it's unrelated. And I don't understand why people have such an issue with taking the accountability for that. It doesn't mean you're not a good person. Like, I don't feel guilty. I didn't do anything wrong, but I feel like I have an accountability to my civilization to do whatever we need to do to make it better. And that can only happen if we acknowledge and repair this. So I don't know. It just seems commonsensical to me. And people would act like you're taking money out of their wallet directly.
Well, we know MMT, so we know that that's all a lie and they can pay whatever they want to pay and nobody's coming to your door and knocking on your door and asking for extra money. But you brought up a good thing because you understand how it all happened, but you have to understand that people in this country have been conditioned to be anti-Black. Like, after slavery, we started coming together. The country resegregated us. We were literally coming together. Some of us had started moving together, marrying, building businesses, doing all of these things. And then they literally, what would happen is, if say you're a good white person and you want to work with the nice Black people who just got out of slavery, and they would literally make it where you couldn't work and you couldn't feed your children. And then they would tar and feather people. Like, this was real. There was a real danger, even outside of just losing your livelihood, which, let's be honest, that's a danger, right? Like, if you can't feed your kids and your family, that's a real cost. So, but there was physical cost to this. And then even when we go into the 60s and we get into redlining, it's just like, if you want to, if you say you're a good person, I was just reading something. There was a gentleman, he spent years in prison because he had the audacity to sell his house to a Black person.
Right.
Like, the audacity. And even with that, if Black people moved in and people decided that they were going to do white flight, you could lose all this money that you put in your home. So it's like, even if you were a good white person, they set up the system to make you have to be anti-Black, or else it could affect you and harm your family. So that's the thing that people need to understand. Like, we can sit here and be like, you're this way, but why don't we just talk about the conditions that have made us this way and kind of move forward from there? And people don't understand as well, because I read everything. So I I read this thing about how the U.S. became less racist towards Asians. How that happened was they literally started writing articles about how they were good people. They would write articles about their businesses. They actually elevated them and showed people like, look, these are good people. Like, you can be around them, you can deal with them, and then they gave them opportunities. They gave them loans. Like, all of these things helped make people less racist towards this group after everything that had happened, right? So, but on the other side, we got the opposite. Like, even if you look at old newspaper clippings, you'll see like media was in on it, like the scary black person, the evil black person, like. And we have to understand this country has always been very segregated and is still very segregated. So for a lot of white people, you don't know any black people. And
no, let me tell, I have to say something to the white people. Okay. We're moving from my house. We're downsizing. I have one kid in college, so we're moving smaller. And what I've learned from this most recent batch of looking for houses is white people are so scared. I have never. Okay, so this one, are you familiar with South Florida at all?
Yes, I used to live in Miramar, and then I lived in Brickell for a little while.
Okay, so you'll understand this. So my son goes to a school in Weston. He's got some learning issues. He needs to be in a very small school, whatever. So I'm not going to move too far from where that is. And so I did look at some houses in Weston. I cannot. This is how scared these people are. You've moved so far that you're essentially almost in Naples. Okay, these people are so far out there, but yet they still gate their communities. So who are you? Like, you can't be. These people could not be more scared. I don't understand, and I am happy to say that I am finally going to be gate free yet again. I have been behind a gate for a while. Out of necessity of it was what was available I didn't want to switch my son's school. So yeah, no, it was but I haven't liked it. And the only good thing about the gate, Sam, seriously, is it keeps out the Jehovah's Witnesses. and that is something that I much appreciate. So, but seriously, I wanted to touch on something you said about the anti-Black, because this is where I start getting in the weeds with reparations, because when you talk about descendants of American slaves, obviously that does not encompass all Black people.
Yes.
And Black people, whether, Caribbean people, South American people that came whatever year they came, have still been subjected to the same things post-slavery, really. So I feel like, and are still part of the communities that are vulnerable and suffering communities. So when you're talking about reparations, and descendants of slaves, how do the people fit into that are not that?
Okay, so before 1965, there was less than 36,000 non-descendants of slavery here. So when you just start talking about that, 1965 is the Immigration Act, right? And then if you actually want to go deeper, most Caribbean people came in the 80s and the Africans came in the 90s. So they literally came after redlining.
Right.
So for me, my next door neighbors in my house in Watts are from Mexico. They're Mexican. They've been here since the 70s. They've experienced discrimination. They've experienced certain things.
Oh, yeah.
So why shouldn't they be included in reparations? They came before the other Black groups. They need help. And that's what I try to explain to people. Like, this claim is to a specific set of people. Now, this is where I veer from the normal ADOS group. So the regular ADOS group talks about having a Black agenda as well. And those other groups would be folded into the Black agenda. For us at Reset Race, our interest is in American agenda to fold everybody else into. So our thing is, we would like to be paid reparations first. And when we say reparations first, we'd be happy with the reparations bill being on the left, and the federal jobs guarantee, Medicare for all, the $25 an hour. I would like housing as a human right too. I like to swing for the fences. I like that bill on the right
You're
side.
You're getting greedy. You're wanting housing.
I'm beyond greedy. The left and right. So I want the one on the right for everybody. Like, I don't think you should fix my school because I'm Black. I think you should fix my school because I'm an American, and we need to be competitive in the world, and we need to be able to fix the problems that are coming down the pipeline. in this country. So that's where I veer a little different. So when you ask me about those groups, I think they should be included in a larger agenda that fixes the whole country. Like, I don't want to just take my money and run off, because I still have to live here. And if the country is falling down around me, I'm not interested in that either. Like, I think that's part of the thing that a lot of socialists and a lot of white leftists worry about. I think they feel like if Black people get their reparations, we're going to run off and leave the fight. But they don't understand, like, we care.
Where are you going now? Like, where are you going?
Thank you, Jen. Jen, do you understand that Black people cannot go anywhere en masse? Anywhere.
I have to tell you, just like a personal anecdote, when this running for Congress, this campaign, one of the coolest things that came out of it for me is that I actually have a Black friend. And I don't mean a colleague, a coworker, you know what I mean? Like, I mean a friend. And that, and somebody that comes from that whole different America. Mm-hmm. And I have since been able to see that. And
that's so funny. You have a me, and she has an Edie. That's my really? Edie is last October is when I met my friend Edie, literally on Twitter, fighting about this stuff, and we've been friends ever since. And she is my first white lady friend, like real.
Really?
Friend. Like, I come to her house. I spend time with her kids, her husband, like her family. Like, yeah.
Yeah, same. And for my friend Mo, I think I'm only the second white lady she's ever like considered a friend. Mm-hmm. But I've seen things now that I can never unsee and that have changed the perspective entirely. And this concept of racial triage, are you familiar with that concept?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, so there's a woman, her name is Dorothy Brown. She wrote a book called The Whiteness of Wealth, which is similar to like the Black tax, but it's a little bit, she's a economic law professor. Yeah, The Whiteness of Wealth. It's really good. I tried to get her on the show. She wasn't that interested, but I tried. But one of the things she talks about is this idea of racial triage, that just when you're Black, you are constantly in a state of determining level of aggressions. Like some are nothing and some are this, and you got to explain this, and you got to walk on eggshells about that. And you've got to like that concept. And when I was reading that book, because of my friend, I totally got that. Like, I'm like, oh my God. And I've seen it where it's like, I've looked at her and I'm like, this is exhausting. Like, I don't know how you can deal with this. And she thought it was funny that I said that, but it's like, I really, yeah. So anyway, I'm very appreciative of that because I feel like it's a gift to me. Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.